Welcome to Books on Air, the podcast you really don't want to miss. I'm Suzanne Harris, and you, dear listeners, are about to get a sneak peek at what goes on behind the scenes with authors. You'll find out where they get their secret recipe for creating a book. You'll find out where their ideas come from, and you will get the inside scoop on their next project. Want to know more? Well, we'll tell you where to find them on social media. Are you ready? I cannot wait to introduce you to the author I'm going to talk with today. His name is Mike Hemingway, no relation to Ernest Hemingway. Let's get that out of the way up front. He's here to talk about his book, The Legend of Vysallimore, Book 1 in the Children of the Night trilogy. Mike is an amazing person. My introduction cannot do him justice. He is a true creative spirit. He's an insight and strategy communications consultant. You will recognize his clients when I mention these major names. He was involved and created the Dove Real Beauty campaign. He created films in support of women's empowerment, women's self-esteem, and women's self-confidence. Among his other famous clients are M&M Mars as well as Pantene. His first book is an online book that you can find and get as a free download. It's titled The Mallard and the Dove. This book has been used for children's plays, and it's even been put to music. There's a song titled The Mallard Song by Big Kenny or Big Rich, and you can also find that online. Mike, it's a pleasure to welcome such a true creative to Books on Air. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for inviting me. Glad to be here.
You're just amazing. When we started talking, you and I have talked quite extensively prior to turning on the mic and beginning to record this interview. When did you really start to write?
I suppose I started to write basically short poems or verse, because I find words fascinating. At about the age of 6 or 7, I would rather just be curious about words, just write down what I thought. Didn't share them, but I built up quite a big catalogue, if you like, of what I would call poems, but really they're more like verses. To call them poems is kind of too complimentary. But around the age of 6 is when I first realized that I found it exciting and relaxing to write.
Have you written all your life since you were 6? Yes.
Amongst many other things, but I would quite often just sit down and write down something that interests me. Generally, it's about words. I find words absolutely fascinating, so it's the link of words and subjects, but basically writing down sentences which I find interesting and to come back to them and build on them and eventually end up with something that looks vaguely finished. I would then add the title, and that would give the kind of purpose or the theme to whatever I wrote. But I've been writing goodness knows how many years, but I've been writing like kind of non-stop, and this writing has taken me into mainly work. I work in the communications and advertising business where I've been basically all my working life. Writing books is more recent. It's where I've found something I cared about. I wanted to write what I cared about in a non-pompous, hopefully more engaging way, and that led to the trilogy called The Children of the Night, because there's a kind of purpose behind those books. And I thought I'd get that out of my system, if you like, to write them down. And the way I write best is in verse, and they're all in verse.
You just sound like you have the soul of a poet when I hear you say those kinds of things. Let's talk about The Legend of Vysallimore. I confess, when I first started to read, Amazon has a little description of the book. And when I first started to read the description, my first thought was, wait a minute, is this true history? Because it sounds like it's true history, but it's not. It's fiction, right?
It is, yes, is the answer, but there is some fact in there which created the fiction, created the storyline, if you like. But it is fiction. It's all made up, although the places are not.
Tell me the story behind the story of the Legend of Vysallimore?
I come from my surname is Allman Hemingway, not just Hemingway, Allman Hemingway, and the Allman side of our family is, we can trace it back to about 1300, and there are lots of like famous people in those years. One in particular was a chap called Cavalier Baird, or the Knight Without Reproach. He was a very, very famous cavalier. He was a soldier, almost the definition of chivalry. Henry VIII tried to hire him, but he died in Italy. And when I was reading about him, I read about Middle Eastern or Eastern European history. And then when I happened upon a lady called Elizabeth of Pomerania. Pomerania is an area of northern Poland. And I read about her, and she, at the age of 16, married Charles III, who was the Holy Roman Emperor, and he was 46. And I thought, oh my goodness, poor girl, she must have had a dreadful time. And she was very, very nervous about what's going on here, but she understood it was a kind of marriage of convenience between these two states. But he turned out to be a wonderful guy, a totally brilliant husband. Gave her amazing kids. They became Holy Roman Emperors. They married Richard III. And she died on some Valentine's Day with this picture on her chest. There's a statue to her in Prague. But what inspired me was this strong woman. And she was so strong, actually. They do say that she could straighten a horseshoe, bless her. I wish I could, but not even a plastic one. But I was really fascinated about this other story. So it led me to, but I had this other idea about knights of old, knights errant, wandering around the countryside, battling and all that kind of jousts and stuff like that. And I sort of wondered if the two could get together. So I started to write The Tale of the Teen Queen, but realized I need something that happened before that. And before that story became The Legend of Vysallimore. So The Legend of Vysallimore is about setting up three characters who are a family, a father, a daughter, and a son. And they're basically knights errant. Errant means they wander around fighting. They're like mercenaries. And building up their stories, so when I got to Elisabetta of Pomerania, it would have more of a context and give more emotion to her particular story. One additional thought, coming back to the characters in The Legend of Vysallimore, the knight is called Elgrid. Elgrid the knight. I don't know why, he just is. And his daughter, his son, the son of him is called Koszalin, and the fighting daughter is called Sulliva. And just to let you know, my fourth son is called Evan. But when he was young, people used to say to him, "What's your name?" He said, "Koszalin. I'm called Evan." So I created the name Koszalin for one of the characters in the story. And lastly, the girl knight is called Sulliva, which is Sullivan shortened. And Sullivan said, "Why are you using my name for a girl?" And I said, "What makes you think that girls can't be warriors? Why can't girls be strong? Be proud of her. Be proud of a woman of this strength. Has your name. Doesn't that make you feel good?" He went, "Kinda." But
kinda.
That's as much as you get out of that from a 9-year-old. But the story is about these knights, and something happens to them when they go into a village. Something bad was going on. It's a classic story of good and evil. Nothing surprising about the story, but how it resolves itself and how they overcome evil is the story itself. And the story is about emotion, about unity, about coming together, about people finding each other. And then life takes over, and life doesn't always end the way you want it to. So there is some sadness in this story, but in the end, it takes you through hopefully an inspirational journey, which is The Legend of Vysallimore.
Is there a part of this that you would like to share with the listeners?
There's a lot of it I'd like to share, but there are a couple of things. I think telling the story, I can tell you the story briefly, but for me, the story of the emotion and how the emotion is triggered is more important. Perhaps I could find a couple of verses for you, which will perhaps let people know into the style of what's going on.
I'd like for them I'd like for them to be able to hear the words, because I know that the words for you are so important, and that is a huge part of your creative inspiration, that words lead to ideas, lead to other words, because you and I have talked enough about really your process, which I find very, very interesting. Have I stalled long enough for you to find the spot you'd like to...
You're kind. You give me a break. But, yeah, I think, well, again, the answer is yes, and thank you for the opportunity. But we got these three characters, Elgrid the Knight, Cor Evan, and Suleva, and they go into, they're traveling to a particular place, and they want to rest for the night. They go into an inn, a tavern, which is run by a big barman called Bar Simon, and they're having a rest, and suddenly all hell breaks loose. A horse comes flying through the front door. A man dressed in black with a black skull-like mask on gallops straight up the stairs, shouting, "Where is she? Where is she?" He then rides straight into through a door into a room, grabs the maiden Jane, and goes out through the window and vanishes towards the horizon to a place called Vysallimore. So this kind of kidnap happens right in front of their eyes. And the barman says, "Can you help me get Jane back?" They say, "No, sorry, we only do this for money. We're knights errant." But he said, "But please help." And after a while, they say, "Okay, we'll help you, but only just this once." And as they're about to leave, the barman says, kind of, "Where are you going?" And that was the devil. And in order to beat him, you need different powers. And you'll only find these powers in a place called the Red Tower. And by the way, guys, the Red Tower actually exists. So they go into the Red Tower. And when they enter the Red Tower, they hear a voice. And they don't. I never let anybody know if it's male or female. They just hear a voice. And the voice says, "Come upstairs. Come upstairs and sit down." And they come into a room. In this empty room, well, not empty room. In this room, there are just a table and 3 stools. And one of the verses goes, "Soon they reached a small round room with table and 3 stools, and on the table were 3 rings, and on the rings 3 jewels." So what they've done is the voice leads them to a room where there are 3 rings and 3 jewels, and they're asked to put on the rings. And the voice goes on, "These rings, they mean unending love. Each ring, it has 3 stones. These stones are you, each precious you, 1 love, 3 hearts, 1 home." And the voice goes on, "Now, Elgrid, please embrace your king and hold your children close and open up your heart to them and say what means the most. And ask them of their hopes and dreams and ask what makes them cry and say how much you love them and how that love won't die. And listen to the little things, hear what they want to say, and take the time how to find the power you seek today." Elgrid the Knight looked in the eyes of his daughter and his son, and saw the tears that through the years he dared that never dared to run. And this is the key voice. The voice had found his deepest truth. He knew the voice was right. To be a father was much harder than to be Elgrid the Knight. So the point about it is that whilst he was a great knight, he was not necessarily a great father. And the power he was seeking in the tower was the power of paternal love for his 2 wonderful children. So that's how it starts. And from that moment when they leave the tower, they go on elsewhere. But essentially what happens is that these war-weary knights in this strange place with this strange voice suddenly find themselves, and they leave the tower with 3 rings, each with their own ring, and head off towards their next challenge, which is trying to save the maiden Jane, who is held captive at a place called the Legend of Vysallimore.
I love it. I love the way it sounds as you read it. When you're thinking about someone reading the book, I think you think about 2 things. I think you think about a person who might read the book aloud, either to another person or maybe to themselves. And then you think about the person who would read the work silently. Do you think the message would be different if you read it aloud than if you read it silently? Do you think you hear the words differently?
excuse me. Yes, I do, because I think in my mind, and it might be crazy, which is probably right, but I feel that when you read to somebody, there will be a reaction by that person. Whereas you're expecting yourself to react. You're just reading to yourself. You're in the theater of the mind. I think books are a form of learning, a form of knowledge, a way to expand the mind. I think when you say that, I think the insight of that line, to be a father is much harder than to be Elgrid the Knight. It's like saying, I know a great person at work, but am I any good as a father? And so that's, maybe it's on myself. Hopefully not. But that was the purpose of it all, because the whole story swings and changes from that moment. And what it does do, I feel that it turns the character, it starts to add emotional dimension to the characters. And you start to care about them. And that's what makes part 2 of the story, wants to leave the tower, because Jane, bless her, is being held by these evil monsters, a thing called a lightning tree. A lightning tree is a tree that's been struck by lightning. It's completely black. And on this a sandy bar of sand, there's this lightning tree which exists, and she's tied to it, surrounded by these evil monsters. And so once you get into that battle which takes place between the knights, his kids, against these evil monsters to try and save Jane, you suddenly care about them, and you care about what happens. And I think the adding the emotional importance of their relationship, or the rediscovery of that relationship, is important. The other thing is, which a lot of people some people have told me, is the voice of the mother, and that was never my intention. It might be, it might not. It's up to the reader to understand. They say, is the voice male or female? Don't know. But what I do know, the voice says, if you ever need me, I'll be there. And later on that comes true. But that's really, I suppose, trying to answer, hopefully vaguely clearly, the point about whether there should be a listener, or is it just a book to be read to oneself.
I just love the rhyme. I think being able to read the rhyme aloud just is so valuable. I love that. And maybe it's because I like the idea of the poetry, and I like the idea that you've written it in close rhyme, simply because it changes the dynamic slightly. It gives it more of a, and forgive me for this, but this is how it sort of sounds in my head. Air quotes again, it gives it a ring of formality. It makes me feel like this could perhaps be a manuscript that was discovered, and some monk sitting in a cell wrote this poem. And I mean, it makes all kinds of images come into my head to hear the rhyme aloud.
Well, that's kind. I think the rhyme has to be observed and absorbed, but I think, I'll just read just a final bit, not a final, but another piece here. Because these rings play an important part, because when the rings come together, when they touch, the 3 rings come together, it creates a different thing. Here's when the battle's about to start. This is some of the story goes on to say, suddenly there came a breeze, small waves broke on the sand, and rising from the inland sea, they both could see a hand, and on that hand there was a ring, and on that ring 3 stones, a symbol of a family, 1 love, 3 hearts, 1 home. And when the sunlight touched this hand, the ring the voice had given sent out a light. It was so bright, it seemed to shine on heaven. And the ending is, I'm not going to tell you what the ending is, but there's a kind of Excalibur nature to it from Arthur. But the purpose of making people think about the importance of family, I feel, is important. Whether even if they're distant, I feel that the links that families give is important. I think we all have had tough times, but I think there's always a place we can end up, which is a place called that nest we love, which is called family. And whilst life is not always wonderful, and does deal us some strange blows, I feel that particularly if you can look back on something that was wonderful, I think that gives you kind of calmness. Looking forward is not always a calm thing to do, but looking back can produce a feeling of comfort. And I feel that's where inspiration lies, because I think if you look back, you think, like, God's in his heaven, peace in the valley. There is some calmness down there. The birds are singing, the sun is shining, the daffodils are out. You know, as I said to you earlier, I feel never hold up a mirror to someone. Don't tell me what it's like. Hold up a window, say, this is what it could be like. Let's look through a window at something the way life could be. And all my books are hopefully, I feel that's where inspiration lies. It energizes an individual to think, damn it, you know, it's worth having a go. I think I can be happier, because I do believe that the bedrock of life is sadness. I think everything lies in a bed of sadness. And I think all great cultures build up a way to emerge from this sadness and feel hope and inspiration. And without hope and inspiration, without leaders, without people who take us to interesting places, we end up back in a form of cloud, which I feel is a kind of melancholy, a kind of sadness. I know that's a kind of miserable thing to say, but kind of what I've spent years going around listening to stories of women and the kind of stuff they've had to put up with. Now, it's, you know, I really believe in equal opportunity for women. I'm an activist. I do what I can. And sometimes I get so upset about what's going on, I have to write my way out of it. And these books are that.
I love the fact that it's hope. You're projecting hope. You're saying, you know,
correct.
The proverbial light at the end of the tunnel is not a train. It really is hope. And we will come out on the other side of this. We'll all be different. We'll all be changed. But there's hope. I know that our listeners must be captivated by the ideas and the things that we've talked about from the book. So let's tell them where they can find the book. It's on Amazon, and I always go to Amazon to check and make sure that everything works. So if you want to find The Legend of Vysallimore, and let me spell that for you. If you go to Amazon, in the search feature at the top, if you type The Legend of Vysallimore into the search feature by Mike Hemingway, Hemingway. Click it, the book comes right up. And there's a little brief description right there, and you can buy it on that page. I'm sure that they're so interested and intrigued. I mean, I am, because the history that you have woven into this that's real, and at the same time you have done rhyme, and you've got a great story. I think that this is just so interesting, Mike. I can't wait to see the other two books, The Tale of the Teen Queen and The Ghost of Castle Nest. Let's also tell them a little bit about The Mallard and the Dove, in case any of our listeners want to download your book, The Mallard and the Dove, because it's online and it's free. Is that right?
That's correct, yes, The Mallard and the Dove. It's 100 pages, beautifully illustrated. It's beautifully illustrated,
yes,
stunningly
it is.
illustrated. The Mallard and the Dove, it's a story of love and loss. Life, love, and loss, all the L's. When in doubt, alliterate. If you can't alliterate, make it rhyme. But the Mallard and the Dove is a story of love but incompatibility, because the dove goes in the tree, the mallard goes on the lake. The duck can't go in the lake. The dove can't go. Duck can't go in the tree. The dove can't go on the lake. Whilst they join together in the sky, in the end they're going to have to part. And they do, but it's how they part and how they remember each other and the kindness that they remember and how they remember what they did. They even have their own slogan, to love my love to life. And the last page of The Mallard and the Dove is almost my view of life, which is as the mallard is looking at the sky, at this cloud, wondering if it's a dove. And she's far away. And he just says, I wish you hope, I wish you peace. Praise those you love, love those you meet. A heart that gives is a heart complete. To love my love to life, to love all love to life. And that's The Mallard and the Dove.
Can they, if they put The Mallard and the Dove in a search feature, The Mallard and the Dove by Mike Hemingway, and just click on that, will it come up? Or do they need a site?
No, it just comes up. It's on a thing called Issue. The illustrator, Will Knight, put it up there. Just put The Mallard and the Dove. It'll come up. The pages turn, it's one of the weird devices that happens. You can physically turn the page. It turns it by itself. But it's very, very clear. It's beautifully illustrated. But again, that's been used. It's written in close rhyme again for schools. Yes, Big Kenny of Big and Rich did the Mallard. There are 3 songs in there. They're not necessarily songs, literally to be to music. They're kind of, the songs in it are their think pieces, if you like. Each of the characters has a particular song. But again, it's about life. And I think it's a parable, a metaphor, if you like. But I think anybody who reads it will see themselves in it. It's hardly masked what's going on. But I think what it is a story that, if you want to talk about life to a young child, particularly a young girl, which is written to be read by a mother to her daughter, it's about how to deal with life and how to be hopeful, coming back to your correct use of that word. It is about hope. It's also about how you behave. It's interesting being in America, it talks about respect and all that kind of stuff. In England, we talk about politeness. And I think it's about being polite, being punctual, it's just being there and not wanting anything back. This kind of unconditional friendship and unconditional love. And that's The Mallard and the Dove. Also, love rhymes with dove, which also makes stuff easier, of course.
You are so interesting, Mike. I have enjoyed talking with you so very much. I'd like to thank you for being our guest today on Books on Air, but I have one more thing that I want from you. I always like to give an author the last word about their book. We've been talking about The Legend of Vysallimore.
Yes.
Now, as a reader, I buy a copy, I either get a paperback and I have a book in my hand, or I've downloaded it on a device and I have the device in my hand. I read the last page, I finish the book, close the cover either electronically or physically, and leave the book. What do you, the author, want me, as the reader, to leave with?
That's a very good question. And thank you, truthfully, thank you for it. Of this particular book, it is about hope. In fact, the final visual in the book. Well, let me read you the last 3 stanzas, and then I'll answer your question more directly, which is about the Legend of Vysallimore. It's got the last 3 verses of this. And every year from then till now, or so the legend says, strange events have been seen upon those shadowed days. They say you see a shining knight who brightens up the skies, a father's smile across his face, yet tears are in his eyes. And if you go down to that shore at dawn's most early hour, you'll see the mark of glory past. The lightning tree has flowered. So the story is about hope. By even things that you think are finished, there is life in them yet. There is always something there to be thankful for, something beautiful, and something to cherish, and a memory which is, if I want you to remember something, it's drawn in this book. A lightning tree with a big blackened tree with beautiful white flowers all over it. It shows that there is hope even in a poor old tree that's been struck by lightning. So that's what I'd like to leave the reader with.
Mike, you are such a wonderful, creative spirit. I can't tell you what an absolute delight and pleasure it's been for me to talk with you today. Thank you for being
Pleasure.
my guest today.
Been a delight. Thank you so much.
Now remember, you can find The Legend of Vysallimore on Amazon by Mike Hemingway. You can also download The Mallard and the Dove free. We'd like to thank you for being with us today on Books on Air. Books on Air is brought to you on webtalkradio.net. You can also hear this podcast on iTunes as well as iHeartRadio. I'm Suzanne Harris, and I hope you'll join our next Books on Air podcast, because remember, you never know who's going to be here, and you never know what we're going to talk about. Thank you so very much for listening.